What if your fear of death is actually, like, no different than a child's fear of monsters under the bed?
Which is a wild thing to think about, right?
Totally wild. And, well, what if the very core of who you are, like your actual consciousness, isn't even tied to physical matter at all? What if it's actually a singular, indestructible particle of light?
It really flips the whole script on how we view reality.
It really does. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are jumping into a really profound and honestly surprising text today. It's the final chapter of a book called The Spoke Confucius by the philosopher Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily.
Right, and specifically, we're focusing on the chapter titled The Philosophy of Death.
Exactly. And I know the title sounds heavy, but the mission of our deep dive today isn't to be morbid at all. It's actually the opposite.
Yeah, Al-Waily is basically trying to surgically dissect mortality so we can finally live without that massive shadow constantly hanging over us.
Right, because by breaking down death using, rigorous logic and some incredibly unconventional physics, he's essentially offering us a blueprint for liberation.
For sure. I mean, think about it. We spend so much of our waking lives vibrating with this underlying existential dread.
Oh, constantly.
We build our schedules, our empires, our daily routines. All of it is just built around avoiding the inevitable.
Yeah, we're just running from it. But his premise is that if we can truly understand the mechanism of death, we can strip away the superstition that makes it so terrifying in the first place.
Which is such a refreshing take.
Hmm.
But to stop fearing it, we first have to logically define what it even is.
Right. And when I was reading the source material, this was the moment that forced me to completely pause and I had to reread the page.
The part about absolute separation.
Yes. He starts with this concept that life and death do not overlap, like ever.
You are either fully alive or you are completely dead. There's no middle ground.
Exactly. He says death is merely an imaginary geometric point. It's just the imperceptible boundary line between life and nothingness.
And the really profound takeaway from that geometric point is that death itself contains absolutely zero pain.
Which feels so counterintuitive at first.
It does, but logically, pain is a biological mechanism.
Right.
It requires a living subject, a functioning nervous system, firing synapses.
Mm.
All of that has to be active to feel anything.
So you literally cannot experience death.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the very apparatus required to experience anything has to be turned off for death to even occur.
Okay, let's unpack this, because emotionally we always blur the two states.
All the time.
When we picture death, we imagine it as this agonizing, prolonged event. We project our living capacity for suffering into a state where suffering is physically impossible.
We're basically imagining ourselves being alive while being dead.
Right. Logically, it's like a light switch. The bulb doesn't feel pain when the electricity stops flowing.
It's just off.
Yeah. It's illuminated, experiencing the flow of energy, and then it's just off.
Yeah.
There's no state of being off that actively experiences the loss of being on.
That light switch analogy perfectly sets up the mechanical foundation of Al-Waily's philosophy, actually, because he takes the physics of this quite literally.
He really does. He traces the human body down to its absolute microscopic building blocks.
Right, so he notes that the body is a complex structure made of organs. The organs are constructed from cells. The cells are made of molecules.
Molecules are built from atoms.
Exactly. And atoms are composed of subatomic particles which are fundamentally bound and governed by electromagnetic forces.
And this is where it gets crazy. These forces are specifically mediated by photons, which are basic units of light and energy.
Right. And this leap is what really challenges traditional biology. He argues that the human mind, the soul, the core of our consciousness, it's essentially what he calls a chief photon.
A chief photon. In Arabic, the term is photon raisi.
Yeah, photon raisi. He envisions this singular governing unit of light acting as the ultimate commander of our entire atomic structure.
But wait, like photons are light, how does a single particle of light act as the biological steering wheel for an entire human body?
Well, Al-Waily is building a very specific bridge between physics and metaphysics here. His argument hinges on the idea that complex matter alone is entirely inert.
Meaning it's just dead weight without something animating it.
Exactly. If the human body were just a collection of dead atoms, it could never spontaneously organize into the breathtaking complexity of a living, breathing, thinking human.
Right. There has to be an organizing principle.
Yes, matter and spirit have fundamentally different natures. Matter is heavy, it's complex, and it's prone to decay. So he suggests our biological machine must be animated and directed by a highly evolved, utterly simple, energetic unit.
So the chief photon is the energetic architect keeping billions of atoms cooperating.
Exactly.
Okay, I struggle with this. I really do. Let's play this out realistically. We know from modern neuroscience that if a specific part of the physical brain is damaged, a person might lose specific memories,
Yeah.
or their entire personality might change. If my brain is decomposing, my memory and my ability to think are breaking down with it. So how can Al-Waily claim this core intelligence survives intact if the physical hardware it relies on is rotting?
That's a great question. To understand his perspective, we have to separate the instrument from the operator. Think of the human body, including the brain, as an incredibly complex grand piano.
Okay, I'm with you.
The chief photon is the pianist. If a few keys on the piano are broken, the pianist cannot play a beautiful sonata. The output is messed up.
Right.
And if the entire piano is destroyed, the music stops completely in that room. But the destruction of the piano doesn't mean the pianist forgot how to play,
Oh, wow.
nor does it mean the pianist ceases to exist. According to Al-Waily, complex matter decomposes, a cell breaks apart, an organ rots. But the chief photon, the pianist, is simple energy.
So it's not made of smaller subatomic parts that can be dismantled.
Exactly, it's indivisible.
So because it is fundamentally indivisible, it physically cannot decay.
Precisely. When the body's environment becomes unlivable, when the piano is completely broken, this photon merely detaches and departs.
It just floats away.
Yeah. And Al-Waily is really echoing the intuition of ancient philosophers here. Thinkers like Plato or the Islamic polymath Avicenna. They argued centuries ago that the soul had to be a simple, indivisible substance.
Because only complex things can fall apart.
Right. Al-Waily has simply updated that ancient metaphysical intuition with the modern vocabulary of quantum physics.
It's a brilliant synthesis. But it brings up an incredibly obvious friction point for anyone listening to this.
The fear aspect.
Yeah. If our chief photon just peacefully floats away and the exact moment of death is physically painless because we aren't biologically active to feel it, why has humanity spent millennia utterly terrified of it?
Well, if it's so harmless, why are we all so scared?
Exactly. If this transition is mathematically and physically harmless, why the cold sweat at 3 a.m.?
Well, Al-Waily identifies this as the ultimate human contradiction, and he answers it by examining the deep divide within the human mind itself. He sets reason against emotion using this really great spatial metaphor.
The iceberg thing, right?
Sort of, but he visualizes it more like a frozen lake. The sheer, unfathomable mass of the deep ice underneath represents our primitive emotion.
Okay.
This deep ice has been freezing our oldest survival instincts into place over millions of years of evolution. The thin layer of fluid water resting on the very top of that ice, that represents our modern logical reason.
So reason is just this thin, surface-level veneer.
Exactly. The fear of death doesn't come from the logic of the water on top. It stems from the sheer immovable mass of that primitive emotional ice beneath it.
So the fear of death is essentially a superstition ingrained in us from our earliest childhood. It's tapping into those ancient evolutionary survival codes.
Right. Our emotional core is conditioned to be terrified of the dark, of the unknown, of endings, long before our rational fluid mind is even developed enough to analyze the actual facts.
He actually uses Shakespeare as an example in the text to prove how powerful that deep ice is, which I thought was fascinating.
Oh yeah, that's a great part.
He says, even a towering literary genius with an incredibly mature, highly developed rational mind might still harbor an irrational fear of ghosts or local superstitions.
Why? Because if Shakespeare's emotional core was conditioned by ghost stories and terrifying tales from his youth, his massive intellect can't always override that deep childhood imprint.
Reason alone struggles to thaw those ingrained emotional habits. We are taught to fear death when we are young, and that fear hardens into an automatic instinct.
And we see this play out in everyday life. The expectation of an event creates a physical reality in our bodies that the event itself never would.
It's exactly like riding a modern roller coaster. You can look at the engineering specs. You know the tracks are inspected daily. The harnesses are hydraulically locked.
Your thin layer of rational water knows you are perfectly safe.
Right. But as that car clicks up to the top of the massive drop, your stomach still plummets. Your heart races. Your hands sweat. Your primitive emotional ice is screaming, "We're going to die!"
And Al-Waily points out that this expectation of dropping is where all human suffering actually lives. The expectation of death ruins our daily lives much more than death itself ever could.
We suffer 1,000 imaginary, agonizing deaths in our minds because of this conditioned dread.
While the actual event is just a quiet detachment of a photon.
He also touches on this really visceral, visual illusion that keeps us trapped in that fear, the illusion of the corpse.
That part is so heavy, but so necessary to talk about.
We look at a decaying body, and because our brains are evolutionarily wired for profound empathy, we project our own living suffering onto it.
We unconsciously look at a deceased loved one and think, oh, they must be so cold. They must feel so trapped.
Yeah, the human mind deeply struggles to separate the vibrant person we knew from the physical vessel they left behind.
But Al-Waily is adamant that chief photon has definitively detached. The vessel feels absolutely nothing. To fear what happens to a corpse is to fundamentally misunderstand what a corpse actually is.
It is an empty room.
Exactly, an empty room.
It's fascinating how he also tackles the religious anxiety around this, which is a massive source of fear for so many people.
It really is, and he approaches it very impartially, which is interesting.
Yeah, regardless of a reader's personal faith, his philosophical argument here is that an infinitely wise and powerful creator would logically lean toward immense mercy rather than disproportionate torture.
He suggests that believing in an excessively cruel, punitive afterlife is often just humans projecting our own earthly cruelty onto the divine.
He views the obsession with terrifying afterlives as just another emotional distortion of the deep ice.
Right. If there is a grand design, an elegant logic to the universe, it wouldn't culminate in pointless eternal suffering for a simple photon that was merely navigating a biological machine.
Listening to this, I find myself thinking about how we can practically apply this.
Like in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah. If we use Al-Waily's logic to try and quiet that emotional dread, if we accept the roller coaster is ultimately safe, the creator is merciful, and the photon just floats away, how does that change how we look at the time we are alive?
Well, this brings us to what might be the most grounding and practical framework in the entire text. Al-Waily introduces the concept of the lone.
The lone. In Arabic, the term is al-ariya.
Yes. He argues that life is simply a borrowed item.
I found myself lingering on this concept long after I put the source material down. It completely shifts your psychological baseline.
It really does.
Yeah.
Think about the mechanics of borrowing something valuable. If you borrow a fantastic rare book from the library or an expensive tool from a neighbor, you enjoy it.
You use it, you learn from it.
You extract benefit from it. But when the due date arrives, you don't fall to the floor weeping uncontrollably because you have to give it back.
Right, because you always knew from the very moment it was placed in your hands that it wasn't yours permanently.
Exactly. You accept that the lending period is over, and you return it to its rightful owner with gratitude.
It completely reframes the narrative of death from something precious is being violently stolen from me to I am peacefully returning something I was incredibly lucky to borrow in the first place.
That framing changes everything.
If I view this coffee, this conversation, this specific Tuesday afternoon as borrowed time, the entitlement vanishes. My stress response to minor inconveniences drops.
The relief is immediate because the burden of ownership is removed. And he uses this concept of the loan to point out the ultimate uncompromising fairness of mortality. It is the great equalizer.
Kings, peasants, geniuses, and fools. Everyone has to return the book eventually.
Imagine for a second if that wasn't true. Imagine if life wasn't a universal loan.
Oh, man.
If immortality was a commodity that could be bought, traded, or synthesized in a lab, what would actually happen?
The billionaires, the absolute elite of society, would hoard it.
Absolutely. They would buy up centuries of existence. They would consolidate wealth and power forever.
And the rest of humanity, the poor and the marginalized, would literally die of envy and despair watching them.
Society would fracture permanently. The fact that death is an unbreakable universal law is quite literally what keeps humanity sane.
It is the ultimate proof of systemic fairness in the universe.
Right. No amount of money, power, or influence can bribe reality to let you keep the borrowed book past its due date.
Beyond the social fairness, I was struck by his view on the personal fairness of the loan ending. He introduces a sort of profit and loss ledger for human existence.
Oh, this part is really interesting.
Yeah. If we sat down and mathematically, objectively calculated our hours of pure, unadulterated joy against our hours of misery, stress, anxiety, and sheer boredom, the ledger often balances out perfectly.
And for a lot of people, the misery significantly outweighs the joy.
It's a sobering calculation, but a necessary one.
Waily notes that human psychology is built on a treadmill of diminishing returns. If a successful person achieves their dreams, they adapt to it. It just becomes the new, mundane baseline.
It stops feeling like joy and just feels like normal.
Right, so living forever physically wouldn't be this endless parade of euphoria. It would be an exhausting eternal treadmill.
Mathematically, the end of the loan isn't a tragic robbery. It's often a very peaceful, highly necessary rest from an incredibly demanding state of existence.
Listening to this ledger of joy versus misery, it really highlights why extending physical life indefinitely would be personally exhausting. But Al-Waily doesn't just leave us with the comfort of an ending.
He still believes in a very real type of immortality, doesn't he?
Yes, he offers a distinct path to living forever, just not in the physical vessel.
And it has nothing to do with freezing your brain or searching for a fountain of youth.
Not at all. It requires us to completely zoom out and look at why nature designed this temporary system in the first place.
Right.
Al-Waily defines true immortality as the legacy of good deeds. The term he uses in the text is al-tayyibat.
Al-Tayyibat.
And it is crucial to understand that he doesn't just mean being polite to your neighbors. He's talking about leaving behind tangible, echoing impacts that benefit the collective human species.
Like inventions that reduce human labor.
Yes.
Medical cures that eradicate terrible diseases. Profound art that comforts people in their darkest moments. Or even just raising good, kind, structurally sound children who contribute positively to the social fabric.
Exactly those things. This is the only legacy that actually defeats the geometry of death.
Wow.
Your physical form, your atomic structure returns to the Earth, your chi photon detaches. But the impact of your tayyibat echoes forward permanently, altering the course of the generations that follow.
So your photon leaves the system, but the ripples you made in the pond keep expanding until they hit the shore of the future.
That's a great way to put it. And to understand why he emphasizes this so heavily, we have to look at his vision of human evolution. He contrasts his philosophy directly with Friedrich Nietzsche's famous concept of the Übermensch, or the Superman.
Oh, right. Nietzsche's Superman is essentially the ultimate human who imposes his personal will on the world. It's heavily focused on dominance, right?
Yeah, Nietzsche's philosophy arose from 19th century interpretations of raw survival of the fittest. The Superman focuses on physical power, dominance, and the imposition of personal strength, often subjugating others to achieve greatness.
And Al-Waily rejects that.
Completely. He argues that a single dominant individual eventually dies or is overthrown, and their dominance leaves nothing but a vacuum. Instead, Al-Waily introduces his own concept of the perfect man.
So how does the perfect man operate differently?
Well, Al-Waily's ideal human isn't trying to dominate the weak. They are striving to achieve moral, intellectual, and scientific perfection for the collective.
Ah, for everyone.
Yes. The true peak of humanity is the person who creates the most tayyibat, the most good for everyone else.
Because he views human survival as a cooperative enterprise.
Exactly. A cure for a disease survives forever and elevates the entire species. Good deeds are not just moral imperatives. They are biological imperatives for the survival and evolution of humanity.
So like Nietzsche's Superman wants to conquer the world to prove his strength, while Al-Waily's perfect man wants to cure the world to ensure its future.
That distinction perfectly explains why death is not just socially necessary, but biologically required.
Yeah.
Al-Waily asks us to imagine if the very first humans, the early Stone Age hunter-gatherers, had never died.
Oh man, the Earth would be completely unlivable.
We would have trillions of early hominids competing for the exact same physical resources.
There would be zero physical room and zero ecological resources for new generations to be born.
Right. That means no room for the agricultural revolution to occur. No space for the Industrial Revolution, the Renaissance, or the digital age.
Without death, humanity would be permanently stuck in its earliest, most primitive draft.
It's essentially like needing to clear the cache on a massive computer network.
Yeah. If you never clear the temporary memory, the system bogs down, overheats, and eventually crashes.
You have to wipe the old data, return the borrowed hardware so you can install a much more advanced, highly complex operating system.
So death isn't nature failing us. It's nature upgrading us.
Exactly. It is the exact mechanism that allows the perfect man to eventually evolve over thousands of iterative generations.
That perspective is the ultimate comfort Al-Waily is offering in this chapter. You are not a victim of a cruel universe.
You are an active, necessary participant in an incredibly elegant, forward-moving system.
Your physical departure isn't an error in the code. It's a requirement for the universe to keep improving.
Yeah,
Man, we have covered some truly massive reality-altering concepts today. Let's bring it all back together.
let's do it.
We started with the primal fear of the dark, and we've ended up exploring the evolutionary engine of humanity. Death, according to Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily, is not an agonizing overlap of suffering. It is a clean, instant, geometric departure of our governing consciousness, the chief photon.
And the terror we feel leading up to it is nothing more than an evolutionary hangover. It's a childhood superstition driven by the primitive, deep ites of our emotions.
Tricking our rational minds into fearing a transition that we won't even physically possess the biology to feel.
Right. Life is merely a borrowed book.
We check it out, we read it, we experience the profound ups and downs of the plot, and then, when the due date arrives, we return it to the shelf.
And by returning it, we make way for the next generation to step forward, write their own advanced chapters, and push humanity just a little bit closer toward the ideal of the perfect man.
It completely reframes the burden of existence from a desperate clinging to a graceful participation.
It really does.
So, what does this all mean for you? If life is just a borrowed item, how does that change the way you interact with the world today?
That's the real question.
I think it relieves the immense pressure we put on ourselves to control everything. You don't have to cling so tightly to your status, your wealth, or your timeline.
Your only real job, your only true rent for the time you borrowed on this earth, is to try and leave behind a few good deeds.
To invent something useful, create something beautiful, or just be kind enough to leave the world a fraction better than you found it.
But there's one final lingering question that this entire philosophical architecture raises. Something for you to ponder long after you take off your headphones today.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If Al-Waily's bridge between physics and metaphysics is right, if your core consciousness is truly an indestructible chief photon of light that simply detaches when the biological machine finally powers down,
Where exactly does your light travel to next? A perfect, infinite mystery to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of the sources. We hope dissecting these concepts brought a little more light to your day.
and maybe chased away a few of those monsters under the bed.
Until next time, take care.
Keep questioning the world around you, and take care.